Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal, Season 2. You can learn more about our topics and speakers by joining our Environmental Fridays Facebook group. This series is brought to you by Best Early, the Benton Spirit Community Newspaper, Andrews University Community Engagement Council, GC Scored, Every Piece Matters. Introducing your host, Dr. Desmond Hartwell Murray, and this week's co-host, Her Excellency Ambassador Yolande Y. Smith. This week on Environmental Fridays, we'll be hearing from UNEP Chief Scientist, Dr. Andrea Hinwood.
Thank you all for being supportive of Environmental Fridays. It is personal. This is the last episode 18 for season 2. We will begin again season 3 in the fall, and you'll be hearing more about that. But we want to thank you all so very much. All of you have been supportive to different degrees, but I wanted to just call out two persons' name. Princella, thank you so much for being supportive of Environmental Fridays. And Len Archer, he's not here today. He told me he wouldn't be able to make it. He comes to every Environmental Fridays. Thank you so much, Len. So thanks to all of you, again, who have been regulars and supporters of Environmental Fridays. It is personal. And so, if you want to get some more information about Environmental Fridays, we are on the online. Our website is www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. We started Environmental Fridays as a way to contextualize, to make chemistry real to my grade 10 students. It has obviously now expanded beyond that. It's left just the classroom, and now it's across the United States and the Caribbean. Thanks again to our guest speakers and audiences. Our topic today is our triple planetary crisis, and you will be hearing from Andrea Hinwood. She will be properly introduced here very shortly. I would first go ahead and introduce the introducer of our speaker. And I have come to know Her Excellency Yolande Yvonne Smith. She is Grenada's ambassador to the United States, since 2018. And she serves as the permanent representative to the Organization of American States, which you will hear her speak a little bit about in terms of their environmental initiatives that's coming up here soon. Ambassador Smith has had over 25 years in the diplomatic service, and she was educated at Happy Hill Secondary School in Grenada. And then she holds a certificate in information systems training from Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada, a bachelor's of science in information systems, a master of business administration with emphasis on international marketing from Strayer University. And she assumed multiple roles starting in January to September 2019. She is the chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development and the chair of the Permanent Council. She is passionate about the environment and empowerment of women and young people. She also enjoys volunteering to conduct personal development programs for young women and administrative professionals. And interestingly, she was crowned Miss Grenada in 1989. She has one daughter and 2 grandkids. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Your Excellency. And so now you can introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murray, and it is really a pleasure to be on Environmental Fridays. As you say, I am passionate about the environment and what we are doing right now at the OAS in preparation for the 9th Summit of the Americas, which will take place in California. We have 5 political declarations, and 2 of those declarations are on the environment. We have a sustainable green future, as well as accelerating the clean and renewable energy transition. So I am very pleased to be on this program, but it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you a leader. And yes, you heard me say leader, because most times we associate leaders with politics and business. But the woman I want to introduce to you today is a leader in her field. Dr. Andrea Hinwood serves as the Chief Scientist of the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. She's an environmental specialist with expertise in environmental exposures and impacts on human health. Dr. Hinwood earned her PhD in environmental epidemiology from the Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. And let me tell you, she has a lot of letters behind her name. BSc, MAPPSC, PhD. Prior to her current position, Dr. Hinwood served as the first Chief Environmental Scientist at the Environment Protection Agency, EPA, in Victoria, Australia. She was previously Associate Professor at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia and held appointments as a member and Deputy Chair of the EPA of Western Australia and a seasonal member of the State Administrative Tribunal of Western Australia. During her career, Dr. Hinwood provided strategic advice to the Australian government on a wide variety of environmental matters, including ozone-depleting substances, air quality, fire, and smoke. And a little known fact is that on November 4th, 2021, Dr. Hinwood was a panelist at the World Health Organization's first live roundtable exploring the future of the COVID-19 pandemic and other infectious threats. Join me in welcoming to Environmental Fridays, Dr. Andrea Hinwood.
Thank you so much, Excellency. That was such a nice introduction. You're very kind, and it's great to be here today. Now I'm going to get straight into it and find my presentation, and hopefully I can display it properly for you. So I'm sure you'll let me know if you can see it in full screen.
Not yet. It's not in full screen yet.
Okay. I've just put it on now. Can you see it now in full screen?
Not in full screen yet.
Okay. I'll give it a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Because on my screen it's showing. If not, I'll take it down and try again.
Yeah, no problem. We are pretty laid back here, so, and these technical things always happen, so it's not a problem.
No, it's so interesting. You know, when it works really, really well.
Yes. When it doesn't, yeah.
Okay, let's try this one.
There you go. There you go. It's good.
Okay, there we go. All right. So thank you, everyone. And thanks to Desmond for inviting me as well. And as a kind introduction. So I'm going to talk to you. And I feel in many ways I'm probably talking to a group that understands many of the things that I'm talking about, and possibly you know about a lot about what Unep does. So I hope that this will provide some new information, perhaps things that you were not aware of. So just to say who Unep is, United Nations Environment Program, and we're actually celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We had Unep at 50 celebrations in March this year, and indeed the 1972 famous Stockholm conference on the human environment, that's actually happening in early June, and it's a celebration, or really the start of the formation of Unep. And we are a global authority. We set the environmental agenda. We promote implementation of the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals within the United Nations system. And our mission is to provide leadership, encourage partnership in caring for the environment. We do this via a range of different ways across a broad array of topics that are actually affecting the environment. We're governed by the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the highest level decision-making body on the environment. And we are governed by 193 member states, and as well as representatives from civil society, businesses, and other major groups and stakeholders. And what's interesting, I've been telling my colleagues, I've been with Unep now for about a year and a couple of months. And I don't think we quite realized how many areas we actually focus on. We currently publish in 35 topic areas, which cover 37 disciplines, everything from, engineering, nanotechnology, social sciences, a whole range of different areas. So it's a huge remit. We also provide the secretariats for multilateral environmental agreements, and you'll be familiar with the Montreal Protocol, but on conventions on biological diversity, the Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam Conventions, the Convention on Migratory Species, etc. And our aim is to tackle the triple planetary crises, as it's now known. And these are the three interconnected crises, which of pollution and waste, climate change, biodiversity and nature loss. And essentially, these three issues, pollution and waste contributes to climate change. Climate change exacerbates the issues of pollution and waste. Climate change impacts on biodiversity and nature loss, but also has an impact on pollution. Our activities, our production and consumption, of course, is significantly affecting biodiversity and nature loss. So it's interconnected. And so while we talk about these three crises, and indeed they are the three pillars that we use in Unep to plan, we do consider them as interconnected and we need to be dealing with them. So I thought I'd just briefly go through what these three pillars and some of the key areas for us at the present time. So I know this is a horrible graph, but I actually really like it because it comes from our emissions gap report. And the recent report was released in 2021. And what this graph is showing is, if you have a look at the gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents, which considers all greenhouse gas emissions, and it considers what we need to do to actually achieve a 1.5 degree increase in temperature. So it's predicated on the fact that we already have temperature increase. So if you have a look at, I don't know what color it's showing on your screen, but to me it looks purple at the top, and it's got 2010 policy scenario, right? That's the policies that we had in place to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see, our current policies are kind of doing a little better than 2010, but they're not really significantly decreasing that curve so that we reduce the amount of emissions of carbon dioxide, Y, so that we can actually pull down the temperature increase. So at the moment, we are on track for about a 2.8 degree increase by the end of the century. We also know that if we put in place significant measures, we can actually move that temperature increase down. And importantly, the main message that Unep is trying to impart at the moment is that if we take significant action within the next 10 years, we will actually buy ourselves some time to actually put other measures in place to ensure we decrease the temperature increases we're expected. And what we're trying to do is decrease those temperature increases so that we do not have the frequency and intensity of climate events that we're expecting, that we don't have the warming, which has all of the impacts on biodiversity and human health and the way that we live. So if you're interested in the emissions gap, I find it quite an interesting concept to explain, but this is the decrease in greenhouse gas emissions that we need to achieve to actually meet a lower temperature increase. I also want to just briefly mention the short-lived climate pollutants. We have other greenhouse gases such as methane, but it's in the atmosphere for a shorter amount of time. And we're putting quite a big emphasis on these short-lived climate pollutants because if we deal with those, again, very quickly, we also can make a significant dent in terms of our expected temperature increase and the associated impacts of climate change. And some of the other short-lived climate pollutants, such as black carbon, is suggested to have significant impacts in, say, our Arctic and Antarctic regions, because it actually facilitates the melting of ice associated with temperatures as well. And of course, we have tropospheric ozone, which is formed from air pollutants, common air pollutants, but particularly from nitrous oxides, nitrogen dioxide, and volatile organic compounds in the troposphere. And ozone is actually a short-lived climate pollutant and can impact on global warming as well. And of course, CFCs and HCFCs, which also have a global warming potential, which have been used in a whole range of activities. And we've been very, very successful in reducing those. But actually the replacements, HFCs, are actually greenhouse gases that we now need to take out of the sector, and pretty quickly. Just to show you this focus on methane, I don't think people quite realised, but methane concentrations globally are just increasing dramatically. Now, methane is formed in, well, we see it in the oil and gas industry, we also see it in the waste sector, and we see it in agriculture. And so where Unep is putting a lot of emphasis on methane, we have an international methane observatory and some methane pledges which countries have made to reduce. And again, if we actually reduce methane emissions, and not all of them, we can actually shave 0.3 degrees. Now that sounds like a very small amount, but when we're talking about the sorts of climate changes that we're dealing with, the sooner the better that we can actually deal with mitigating the effects of climate change. So there's a big effort in terms of methane. We have a Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is devoting some effort on methane, but we also have this International Methane Observatory. The other issues that we're dealing with, which are significant, of course, is biodiversity loss in nature. And this comes from our Making Peace with Nature report, which I think was either published, I think it was early 2021, it was actually released. And this is about what we, again, need to do if we take action to deal with biodiversity loss. And of course, improvements in biodiversity and nature will actually improve and help mitigate climate impacts as well. So this is just showing you the historical trends that we're dealing with, and with business as usual is the red trend, which actually shows that we will reduce suitable habitat, we will reduce compositional intactness, which you need for biodiversity, we will decrease wildlife populations, and we'll of course realise even more global extinctions of particular species. But if we take conservation action only, where we just conserve biodiversity and we try to maintain what we have and protect it, it's not enough. We actually need integrated action, which is about restoration. So this decade, Unep and the UN system calls the Decade for Restoration, which is where we actually, again, look at the benefits of ecosystem restoration, from climate adaptation, from mitigation of climate change in terms of water and also security. And ecosystem restoration has a whole range of benefits that probably have not been realised by countries. And so we've got a big effort in that particular area. If we actually look at the economics of it, half the world's GDP is dependent on nature. And some of the predictive modelling we've done says that every dollar invested in restoration creates US $30 in economic benefits. Agroforestry alone has the potential to increase food security. Food insecurity in areas is a significant global problem. But imagine if we were actually able to start restoring and look at agroforestry, we also can improve food security and agriculture. Restoring populations of marine fish, it's estimated that we could produce an additional $32 billion into the system if we actually work. And this is by maintaining marine ecosystems to protect fish stocks, but also to actually yield some benefits for communities. And of course, if we restore even 15% of converted lands by stopping further decline of our ecosystems, we could actually avoid 60% of the expected species extinction we see. And I think this is the message UNEP's trying to get across. We have multiple benefits by actually taking action in the environmental area. My area is about human health associated with exposure to pollutants. And, you know, it's estimated that 1/4 of the global burden of disease is actually linked to environmental degradation. Global health security with antimicrobial resistance is a significant issue. So this is where we're seeing the antimicrobial resistance to common antibiotics in the clinical setting, but we're also seeing it in the agricultural setting. And what we're seeing is that pollutions actually contributes to a reservoir of antimicrobial resistance in the environment. The extent of that and how significant a problem that is, we're not really sure yet. But what we do know is that it contributes to a potential impact on human health down the track, but also potentially to species. I think most people know that air pollution is a significant burden to society, and with an estimated 7 million deaths a year. But of course, there are many, measuring mortality is quite a blunt instrument. There are many people who are affected by a range of diseases which can be attributed to air pollution. And of course, we know that if we actually solve this problem, there will be significant benefits in terms of our cost in the health system. And so, you know, what do they say? Cent saved today in avoiding prevention is €1 spent tomorrow on rising hospital bills. And what we're looking at is an integrated approach to how we deliver such services so we can respond to those who are most vulnerable in many locations who probably are suffering the worst air pollution, for example. Some of the other issues of concern, chemicals, I think it's really interesting. I was going to talk about some of the action of Unep, but more recently, there's been a decision by the United Nations Environment Assembly to set up an open-ended working group to look at developing a scientific panel devoted on chemicals. And this is based on some of our work, and this is just information in the international arena at the moment about some of the issues of concern to us with respect to particular chemicals. And there have been a number of reports that have been released around this. So we're concerned about chemicals in products. We've been concerned about endocrine disrupting chemicals for some time. Of course, environmentally persistent pharmaceutical pollutants, which is really interesting because they're actually making their way into the environment. We're finding them everywhere because, oops, my slides moved. Because we're not treating wastewater to actually remove the pharmaceuticals, and we're seeing even at very low concentrations, they're impacting ecosystems. And then we've got a range of emerging evidence where we've got significant issue like neonicotinoids, which is effectively affecting, I know it's terrible, isn't it? Affecting bees and all the rest of it. And of course, we've got our per and polyfluoroalkylated substances from firefighting, which are used in defence facilities and the like. So of course, they stay in the environment a long time. So we're dealing with thousands of chemicals. And of course, that to me, in many cases, the exposures in the environment from human health, they're the invisible things. You can't necessarily see them in the environment. We can measure them. And so we kind of haven't been dealing with them, but now there's going to be an increased focus on that. And of course, plastics in the environment, everyone is aware of. It's a visible issue. And, you know, we know that plastics production is increasing, which is incredible in the current environment. These plastics are complex mixtures with many chemicals. So they've got, when they break down, not only do they break down into smaller parts, which become problems for ecosystems, but they're also breaking down into chemicals, which are finding their way into the food system and into humans as well. And of course, we've got the issue of microplastics. So I just want to make a point. We also have a focus on biodegradable plastics because there's a view that they're fantastic. Well, it depends on what they're based on. Yeah. They can be biodegradable and they may not be. Some of them are based on fossil fuels and some of them have the same fate and behaviour as the plastics that we're traditionally producing. So we really need to be considering some of these alternative products. And the UNEA actually agreed to an intergovernmental negotiating committee and a treaty basically on plastics to actually remove the scene that you see in the picture there, but also at source to reduce the amount of plastics that we're producing and to introduce circularity in the system so we don't have these sorts of problems. I talked a little bit about chemicals in products. Unep is taking a value chain approach where we actually take the chemical being manufactured, its use into a particular sector, its way that it finds itself into a product, and of course, end of life and the disposal of that. And so this is an area that we're working in, and there'll be more attention on that. I thought it was useful to give you an example of an integrated health and environment observatory surveillance system. This one's actually in Africa. And this is trying to actually have a database where we have chemical information, what's coming into the system, where are we producing it, that we're actually investing in national interventions. You need to know what's actually coming into the country. You need to know where it's going. You need to know where it's distributed and how it's being disposed of, so that you can intervene and put in management approaches to make sure it's being managed appropriately. And current work, as I say, I talked about chemicals in products, highly hazardous pesticides, antimicrobial resistance, pharmaceuticals, etc. But our approach is really to focus on the management with the value chain, and now looking at sectors, because clearly dealing on a chemical by chemical basis, when you've got thousands of different chemicals in the environment, we need to really start dealing with sectors, and we need to both stop hazardous chemicals at source. We need to make sure they're not being used in products. We also need to make sure that they're not leaking into the environment where humans and ecosystems are exposed to them. We've got an increased strategy on waste. And of course, we look at preventing and reducing, first up, integrated waste management. And when you can't deal with those approaches, then you dispose of residues. And, you know, we're probably going to have a situation where we need to have waste disposal for some period of time because of the structural problems that we've got in dealing with waste. So in terms of waste prevention and reduction, clearly we're focusing on a circular and life cycle approach where we redesign, repurpose, reuse, and refuse to actually maintain the value of our products and materials. So, you know, it's an interesting moral question for me. I have a pair of board shorts that were made with 9 plastic bottles. Now, is that, it's an interesting question. Is that a good example of circularity? But what happens to my board shorts? I must admit, I've had them now for a number of years and they don't show any sign of declining. So is that a good, what would we call that? Reuse of plastic bottles. So plastic bottles will come into the system. You make my board shorts, they last, so far they've lasted at least 5 years. But what happens at the end of the life, and what are the issues with them? And these are the sorts of challenges that we need to start considering. We clearly need to have efficient segregation, collection and recycling in all parts of the world. And of course, we know that that's not the case, and that we've got efficient resources recovery. Some of the processes for when you've segregated waste and you've got it separated and you need to recover it, some of the approaches we need require chemical and heat, and they're causing significant health burden on the people who are actually undertaking that activity. So again, it's something that we need to look at, whether the economic and social benefits of that are good, and whether in fact we should be doing something completely different. And then of course, there's the environmentally sound management of hazardous waste and residuals, and in particular to avoid littering, open burning and dumping. Here in Kenya, it's a common practice right across the community to burn all wastes, plastics, materials, everything. So, and it's a real problem because it's almost something that you do because there are no practices to actually properly collect and manage the waste so that you don't have to burn it. But, you know, it's interesting, where I live, even where there is a collection service, it's still a common practice to burn it because people like burning things, and it's something that happens. And these are the sorts of things that we need to change, and we need to provide easy access and easy solutions to actually dealing with some of these problems, because they still create pollutants both in the air, in the soil, and it's something we know we can do something about. I talked briefly about hazards affecting human health. I think you're probably all aware of it. Climate change, clearly, with the frequency, intensity of events, flood events, heat in particular has a significant impact on a range of health issues. Air pollution, including methane, and of course you add heat to air pollution, you actually get more air pollution. You add heat into the system, you have more wildfires, bushfires, more air pollution equals more health effects, but also effects on agriculture. And of course, the other effect on climate generally, because you're producing greenhouse gases. Existing and emerging pollutants, low and elevated pollutants in the environment are having significant impacts, particularly on children, the most vulnerable, and there are a range of immune function, cognitive issues, etc., associated with some of these pollutants. Waste plastics and microplastics, I talked before. Water quality, you know, we're seeing both nutrients, but also other pollutants enter waterways, which are then ending up in food chains or in water supplies, and there's a direct exposure pathway for people to be affected. Ecosystem degradation, and of course that gets into zoonoses and that connection between ecosystems and the spillover of zoonotic diseases, which become things like COVID that we've seen in the past. And I talked about antimicrobial resistance before. I just wanted to show you that we have a World Environment Situation Room, and we do have air quality. This is a map of air quality on a particular day, which actually shows you what the air quality is across the globe. And this is particularly relevant because in many locations of the world, we don't have sensors. We do not have data for air pollution. So this combines air pollution monitoring with some modelling and provides an estimate, and you can actually have a look at this. It's something that we will be improving, so it's got a better user interface with time, but there are a number of these sorts of systems in development to help us with decision making in providing advice as to what we do in the most affected areas. And I really just wanted to say that the co-benefits of action on achieving net zero in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and reversing environmental degradation. If we actually act on the triple planetary crises, we will have air quality improvements. We will have improvement in health, particularly for vulnerable. We will achieve climate change mitigation. We will enhance agriculture and reduce food insecurity, and economic outlooks can be improved because you haven't got the problems of heat affecting yield and other things. And of course, in all of this, we have to consider communities, inequality and justice for particular communities in the way that we do this and work with them in terms of what is appropriate in a given location. And the science policy interface is perhaps something you might have heard about, but Unep is really, let's be honest, we've had enormous success in many areas. We have improved the environment in many parts of the globe on many issues, and we certainly have technologies, pollution control equipment. We do have waste disposal in many areas. Of our 193 member states, I think we've got 126 with legislation on to deal with air pollution. But it's kind of stopping at that point, and we're not necessarily implementing a lot of the policies and programs, but we're also needing some new approaches. So we talk about this science policy interface, which is to take up the evidence base into policy and then implement it. And one of the things that Unep is doing now is advocating and hopefully enabling open, accessible and transparent data for anyone, anywhere. We're placing more emphasis on solutions rather than challenges and barriers. We have many solutions to many of the issues that I've outlined. We need to embrace a broader array of stakeholders and partners, and this is something that Unep is taking very seriously, and how we do that. And how do we engage with different decision makers, i.e. those who are making decision on public transport or on the energy mix, or who are not necessarily with the environment portfolio and actually see environment as just an impediment to them doing what they want to do. We've had some recent success. As I said before, we've established an intergovernmental negotiating committee for a globally legally binding agreement on plastics by the end of 2024. That's a huge achievement given the issues that are currently happening globally. And as I also mentioned, we have the open-ended working group for a possible science policy panel on the sound management of chemicals and waste and pollution prevention. We have global pledges to deal with methane. We have additional sources of mercury, which have been banned at the recent conference of the parties. And last year, we achieved the phase out of lead in petrol in all countries. Now, that might seem like, well, we should have done it 20 years ago. Yeah, we did start 20 years ago, but actually that's a significant achievement over time. And just to reinforce the message that protecting ecosystems and environmental health, we have solutions. One of my key things that I want to focus on is cities. Most of our populations live in cities. We can actually introduce energy efficient buildings. We can invest in livable cities. We can integrate chemicals management of pollution. We can introduce circularity. And even in cities, we can invest in nature and protect the existing areas. So solutions are available. We need to target well-being, poverty and inequality, because if people are poor and they don't have jobs, well, I'm sorry, environment's not necessarily the first thing on their minds. And we need to get that right. We need to target sectors, ecosystem restoration. We need to look at land use change and what's changing for what, livability, energy efficiency, economic transitions to value natural capital instead of GDP, and at the individual level, awareness of what's going around and how we as individuals can actually contribute to the discussions and the debate about it. And that was all I was going to say. Thank you. Okay.
So yeah, that was very, very good. I don't know if the ambassador is still around. I know she had another meeting. Maybe not. So I wrote down as you were speaking, any good stories? And then you gave us good stories.
Yeah, there are good stories. There
Yes.
are actually lots of them. And I think this is the thing, that there are solutions and there are some fantastic examples and initiatives. And so what we're wanting to do is we want to show the world what those great initiatives are to generate that interest, that this is not an impossible problem at all.
Right. I think that's really important. So I'm assuming you guys at Unep have a communications department that tries to get that out to every country, every nation, so that they could see, as you said, that this is not impossible. And here are some best practices. Here are some places that are doing it right, and so on. Okay, very good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in keeping with that, I would try to have at least one person from Unep every year or every season, because this I think is another way we can try to get the word out about the good stories and about the challenges that we're having. So I'd like to invite others to, if you have questions or statements, I have multiple notes here that I could ask, but I want to make sure everybody participates as well. Anyone has a question at this point? Okay, if not, while you're thinking about it, one of the things that you were talking about is looking at the different sectors. And one of the sector that I've been trying to have someone come and talk to us about is the fashion industry.
Oh,
Because,
okay.
yeah. So what is Unep's approach? Because it is one of the major global polluters, just to be very frank.
Now, yeah, that's really interesting, and I will take that offline and find someone for you, because there's been a lot that's been worked on with looking at sustainability in fashion, and interestingly, here in Kenya in particular, to recycle, but also to source materials for the fashion industry sustainably in the first place. But then once you have your products, then what do you do with them?
Right.
So it is certainly gaining traction. We do have people who work in that space. And I think the comment I was going to make about sectors is you have to deal with the industry or you won't solve it. So
Right.
just because we think fashion industry, you need to behave more sustainably, doesn't mean they're going to go away and do it. So we need to actually engage and come up with the solution. So actually what I'm wearing today comes from a sustainable provider in Kenya.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen the pictures. I think many of us have seen those pictures of piles and piles of trash of just fabric. And oftentimes we've seen them in, small nations, in countries in Africa and, underdeveloped nations. And so that not only has to do with pollution, but also environmental justice issues as well, because things kind of get dumped.
Look, absolutely. And it's disgusting, to be honest. So, so it is something that's absolutely on the radar, and, fashion industry, but the same with e-waste and waste generally are exported to developing countries. And I'm sorry, countries should deal with their own waste and not export it, unless there's a particular specific technological need that you only can do in a particular way. But that's not the case.
That's not the case usually. Yeah, yeah. And so I'm assuming, as the global authority, you work directly with nations, with their ministries of environment. They work with you. I'm assuming, for I know the ambassador talked about the OAS, and the OAS is doing some environmental initiatives. You work with them as well. I'm assuming those sort of collaborations are ongoing.
So I'm not very good with acronyms. So the OAS, I'm not exactly sure who that.
American States, Organization of American States.
So we will tend to deal with US as a member state.
Okay.
As an entity, because it's a member state, and they will have representatives who attend our committee of permanent representatives, etc. However, we also deal with non-member states and with a range of other stakeholders over particular issues as they arise. So while we're governed by the 193 member states, that doesn't mean that we can't look at other issues and other areas, because our remit is to keep the global environment under review. And so depending on the issues, so we have some flexibility in that.
So a particular nation, their government, their Ministry of Environment, or however they frame it, could come and work with you directly on specific issues relevant to their country.
So what normally happens is that we have UNEP officers and, in fact, UN country teams. And so normally what happens, a particular country says, I want to work on, air pollution or plastics or whatever it might be. And actually, I was talking with the Bangkok office with a project that they're doing on the Mekong River in terms of plastics. And that's where the government has actually said to the UNEP, we would really like to do this project, and UNEP helps facilitate it. That may not do it itself. It might actually contract someone else to do it, but yes, that's how it works.
Yeah, isn't that river like that you just cited like one of the worst examples?
Yeah.
Of, yeah. The UN chemicals, of course, I'm a chemist, so that caught my attention.
I heard that at the beginning, Desmond. Yes.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So is this something that could be found online to sort of like monitor the progress of that work with trying to, I guess, come up with some sort of systematic global approach to managing chemicals? Is that online somewhere?
Yeah, so there's a group, and again, you have to forgive me, I really am not good at acronyms. So there's a group called SciCam, which is anyway, it's about integrated chemicals management.
Okay.
And I'll get the acronym for you. And SciCam is all about actually looking at chemicals management, and the aim is from a global perspective. But SciCam, we have not been necessarily very successful in getting integrated chemicals management across the globe. So Unep is the view we've got a lot more to do, and we really need to engage the industries in that particular endeavor to get that happening. And it's everything from actually knowing what chemicals are coming into a country, because some countries don't even know, they don't have inventories, they don't know what sectors are using them. So it's also about getting that information flow right, and then being able to educate, well, this is pretty nasty pesticide, for example, or whatever it might be. So we've got quite a bit of work to do in that space, and that's why we now have a focus on it.
Okay. Yeah, so because many of the chemical producers, for example, are global, multinational. And the problem you talked about with the pharmaceuticals, that's something I've started seeing a lot more information about and concern about. And so, yeah, that's something we traditionally haven't been focused on and talking about. But I've read where many of these pharmaceuticals and drugs that we use, when they're disposed of, they do have impact, significant, some of them significant on the environment.
Yeah, so in my former job, we actually started to do an assessment of emerging chemicals like pharmaceuticals in the environment. So we looked at soil, fresh waters, sediment, etc. And what we have found is that the pharmaceuticals, and this is even with very good wastewater treatment processes, are finding their way into water systems, but more concerningly, they're finding their way into fish. And we are starting to see ecological changes at very low concentrations. We're not talking about high concentrations here. We're talking about really low concentrations. And one of the and for me, being interested in that area, we have no benchmarks about how much is too much. Now, if you're seeing really low concentrations, you need to have none coming in the environment.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's also something you guys are working on. Okay.
Yeah. I have a question. My question is, really enjoyed your talk, Dr. Hinwood. And my question is, what could regular lay people do to facilitate the date, the reduction of the these chemicals, and help to create a safer environment? What could it let somebody, a housewife, a grandmother, what could they do?
Yeah. So in your home, the first thing that you can do is, in your home, when you buy products, is to actually have a look at what is in those products, right? If they've got labels on them, what have they got? If they don't have labels on them, go back to the person that you bought them from and find out who supplied them to say what's in those products. And there is an awful lot of information about some of the chemicals in these products. And generally we would be saying, go and use cleaning products like vinegar, like bicarb of soda. There are a range of benign, they're still chemicals, but they're benign products that clean very effectively in the home. So the first thing is to be aware of what you're using. So I was stunned a few years ago. So we have a big issue with termites. And and they eat through the floorboards and the ceilings and all the rest of it. And I was horrified to discover that the termaticide of choice was arsenic trioxide, which is one of the most toxic chemicals. Now that it's a common, so I was really concerned about the pest control operators using this. But this is the thing, what we do as householders, we engage someone because we've got a problem, and we expect that they actually know what they're dealing with. But often they don't, they know they've got something and they're dealing with it. So I think it's about asking the question, becoming informed about the products you use, and where you live, where you get your fruit and veggies from. Have a look at what the people who produce the food are using in their areas. So I've moved from Australia to Kenya, and the first thing I've done is, where can I source fruit and veggies from local growers who don't use pesticides? Now, sure, the quality of the fruit it probably doesn't last as long, but it's not got the pesticides that you would have associated with other things. So become informed. And the only thing I'd say with that, though, a lot of people become frightened. So don't become frightened, though, because there are chemicals in the environment that have been really good for us across a whole range of areas. And there are certainly areas where chemicals will impact populations in very high concentrations. The trick for us, and humans are very good at actually absorbing and metabolizing and actually getting rid of a lot, right? Some will stay, but much will go. The trick is to become informed so that you reduce your chemical exposures, that you do the best by yourself and your children and extended family, etc.
Okay, I see another hand. Marlene, you could unmute.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for your presentation. It was very hopeful.
Oh, good.
And
I'm hopeful.
I felt hopeful because I recently started looking at the effects of the textile waste on the environment. And I made some personal decisions, but then I thought about the electronic waste, the e-waste.
Mhm.
What can we possibly do? Because you mentioned, stopping it at the source, but we all, the way we live our lives today, it seems like we need this source. And are there any safe ways of disposing of e-waste? Because what I've learned is that they are sent to developing countries for some reason. Well, these countries they're incentivized to get them because of the economy there. What can we do on a personal level, or can anything be done really to recycle environmental waste in a sustainable manner?
Yeah,
E-waste, I'm sorry.
It's a great question. So, and this is it's a challenging one as well, because when the waste is exported to developing countries to separate it out and to get the components that they want out of the e-waste, has huge impacts on families in developing countries who are reliant on that income.
Mm-hmm.
And but there are methods where you can protect health and the environment in the way that you conduct the business. So the first thing is that producers of, say, our mobile phones, and probably like all of you, you're all on a computer, it's all got plastics, It's all got cords and metals and everything associated with it. What we need are places to take these products either back to the person who's actually sold it or produced it, or to actually facilities within our cities where they will break them up properly, employ people to actually undertake jobs in a safe manner to actually recycle the materials into other products. And indeed, in terms of the metals that are used with all the wires and the chips and everything else, they're going to become like gold in the future, because we really we're increasing our use of that. So I'd be asking the question of the company you buy your phone off: do you take it back when I want to upgrade to my next phone, and does it get recycled? And if so, where? And then I'd be talking to my government about what facilities. And the goal for us then is to say, we need industries, innovative industries, to come in place to actually do that. You develop that industry and do it properly in a safe manner to provide good jobs where you're not going to get exposed to pollutants because you're burning it or you're adding acid to it or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where governments, and where Unep is trying to work with governments to say, here is your opportunity for a new industry.
Yep.
We're not going to phase out computers anytime soon, or mobile phones up. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a very good point, is connecting that waste to developing new industries, new job opportunities. Very good. Anybody else has questions? So I know if Princella is still on, she always talks to me about these great ideas she has about, and one of them is Read the Label. She wants to start a Read the Label campaign. It was, at least when she talked to me about it, was mainly, I guess, concerning health, for health reasons. But what you just said is also for environmental, which is connected to health, so yeah. So I think that's a good idea. I don't know if Princess is on, or might want to say something about that. Anybody else?
Well, Desmond, I have a question. Keith Williams,
Yes.
as you said, it was an excellent presentation, and a lot of things to be put out there and thought about. And I'm thinking about the younger folk who might be listening or viewing this recording and saying, what sort of scientific efforts or activities could they be involved with to enhance their knowledge? Because after all, they are the future. I had a student in the mid-90s, actually, in Detroit, where I live. We had a incinerator, and one of the things you talked about in your talk was the incinerating of different waste materials. And back then, that young man had an idea that I don't know if this is all that great to have an incinerator in the middle of the city burning trash. So just thinking about activities probably for middle school or high school students who might want to further do some research and perhaps develop science projects on these concepts.
Good
Yeah.
question, yeah.
I think that's a great question. And in fact, I'd go broader to say, wouldn't it be great in the education system and at universities, no matter where you are, that you actually have some education in environmental issues and the connected nature of it. And then if you're an economist or a finance person, what does that mean for you working in that area, so that you know how to deal with the environmental dimension of the issues? And in terms of motive, we just have fabulous young people, and to actually then get some training in environmental sciences, in the biological sciences, in the chemical sciences, but I would also say in the data sciences and in the analysis sciences, because we have an enormous amount of data now, and to make sense of it, to help with solutions, it would be great to have people who are prepared to go into those disciplines as well. So I did environmental science as an undergrad. I'm so glad I did. I've had a fabulous time. And in regard to the issues that you raise in terms of incineration, in fact, if you go to Copenhagen and to Stockholm, maybe it's only Copenhagen, maybe it's not Stockholm, it's out of Stockholm, but in Copenhagen there is a high temperature incinerator for waste, which is in the middle of the urban area. Why? Because they've got such stringent emissions control equipment that in fact they can coexist. And then in winter, they actually allow people to ski on it when they have snow.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you can make it compatible with, okay. Very good.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. And so to tie that to Keith's question, that's a sort of creativity and innovation that would come from our young people getting involved, understanding the concerns, the problems, learning the science. And that's a good point about the data. I didn't realize that you do have publicly available a ton of global data that could be used for research projects and stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah. So at the moment, we're trying to upgrade our interface, if you like, to make it more accessible for people. So we've got a bit of work at the moment. If you wanted to access it, you'd probably have to write to us. But there is a lot already there. It already exists, but we actually do need a better interface.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm willing to take at least one more question and then we could call it a day. If you don't have a question, I do want to ask one thing about the global air quality. It's the map. So yeah, that's something that I think could be very useful, especially for small island nations and other nations like that. So that's something that any one person could get on there any time of the day and figure out the air quality that's.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would say is that it's a good measure, but it might not give you air pollution information where you are. And what we have started to partner with different groups, IQ Air, I think is their name, we partner with to provide low-cost sensors. Okay. And in Australia, actually, we make the sensors with school groups and deploy them, and they work very, very well for particulate matter. There are some for NOx. So again, I think that's something that would be great in a school or university setting to actually have people have sensors where they then can record their local air quality, which helps with management actions as well.
Right. And so that's one of the things I know Princella is leading a team in a small city here in Michigan called Benton Harbor, and working with some scientists and doctors from the University of Illinois. And we are deploying air monitoring sensors, and we're doing this all in the context of asthma.
Fantastic.
This month, this month is asthma month, but we will extend this project. She will extend this project going forward. So anyway, so many different aspects to this. I'm glad, really glad you talked about the solutions and that there are very good stories out there, because it helps us to understand this is not impossible. It is doable, and our generation, history could look back and say we did good. We did good.
Yeah.
We tried to make a difference. Yeah.
I'm still, but you know what? We still need to make a difference. We still, so, and that's what we must do. Yeah.
Yeah, keep going forward. Yes. So thank you so very much. It was an honor, privilege to have you take your time off. It's around like 5, 6 o'clock there now.
Yeah, it's about 20 to 6. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure.
Yes.
It's a pleasure. And thanks for having me, and thanks for listening. And if you've got, there's some follow-up things I owe you. So I'll send them through to you, Desmond. Okay.
All right. Appreciate that. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And
thanks, everyone.
See you guys next time for season 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. See you. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, Linda. You're unmuted. You gotta unmute.
I'm just saying it was fantastic. I just really especially have an interest in this with health-related issues, because we're seeing so many health-related issues because of environmental toxins now,
Yes,
so I've just become more involved at looking at this, and it's fantastic that you're doing this. We really need to get the education out there to people, so on an individual basis people can start making changes.
Yep.
Yeah, because if the education is not there, people just have no idea. And I think that just sparking their interest and telling them, especially young people, if we can get them on board, because I think so many of these things are new. We're not even, we know it's been going on for a while, but the studies aren't there, etc. So to let them know these things will impact you, and disease has increased significantly. And I know some of that is related to lifestyle, but I believe many of it is also related to toxins in our environment.
Oh, yes.
Because of the thousands of chemicals we release. And I think getting our young people on board, because this is their future, where they will see more of an impact on disease in their lives than maybe we even have, because,
That's right. Yeah. But there are solutions. We
absolutely.
We got to end with that. It's not impossible. It could be done. And we need to get the young people involved, and they use whatever their scientific interests are: biology, chemistry, physics, data analysis. I didn't realize, that. So all get towards making a safer and better environment.
Absolutely. And I've seen changes just in the time when I was living, because I used to live on Lake Chapin growing up. And it used to smell so bad when we used to get out of the water, our clothing. Now it's improves, what I mean? So I know they've cleaned up some and made a difference. I went back to California where I did medical school, and I looked at the air pollution, and I told my son, it's about 50% better than when I was here and attending school. And this was over 20 years ago. He in fact looked it up and said, Mom, I can't believe that you're actually right, but it's literally 50% better. And I said, I can tell by being able to see how well I can see the mountains, I can tell you how much better it is.
Mhm.
So yes, it definitely makes a difference for us to be proactive, and it is hopeful. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, so
Thank you.
We'll see you next season. I'll
Thank
see you
you.
before then, but yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for sending me an invitation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
All right,
bye-bye.
take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Be sure to visit our website at www.theenvironmentalfridays.com